It was supposed to be a happy night. The restaurant buzzed with warmth, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of families celebrating small victories, birthdays, anniversaries. My son Daniel's 30th birthday dinner was no different. Candles flickered across the table, laughter echoed through the private room, and my daughter-in-law Madison kept snapping photos for Instagram. I sat at the head of the table, smiling, proud. For once I thought I had done something right. Then it happened. A waiter leaned in quietly, sliding a folded piece of paper beneath my water glass. I almost brushed it aside, but his eyes met mine, urgent and trembling. My fingers unfolded the note. For words, "Don't drink that." My throat went dry. I looked down at my wine glass, the ruby-red liquid suddenly sinister. My heart stopped, then raced. Without thinking, I switched my glass with Madison's, sliding hers toward me. 10 minutes later, Madison's laughter turned into coughing, then gasping. The room erupted into chaos. My stomach clenched as Madison clutched her throat. Her fork clattered against the plate. Daniel leapt to his feet, shouting her name, his face contorted with panic. Guests stood frozen, as Madison collapsed into his arms. "Call 911. Someone screamed. I sat motionless, my trembling hands wrapped tightly around the untouched glass I had switched. The realization hit me like a punch to the chest. That poison, because that's what it had to be, was meant for me. My breath came shallow, my mind a blur of questions. Who? Why? I looked around the room at my family, the people I had given everything for, and for the first time in my 63 years, I wasn't sure who I could trust. The walls closed in, laughter replaced by sirens in the distance. I pressed my hand against my chest, whispering, "Dear God, what is happening?" As the paramedics rushed Madison away, Daniel's eyes turned on me, sharp, accusing. "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice cracking with fury. His words pierced deeper than any knife. I opened my mouth, desperate to explain, but nothing came out. He glared at me like I was a stranger, not the woman who had raised him after his father died, not the mother who had worked double shifts to put him through college. Around us, whispers rose, suspicion spreading like wildfire. My sister-in-law murmured to another guest, her voice dripping with judgment. "It's always drama with Eleanor," she said, shaking her head. "Nothing good ever happens when she's around." My hands shook as I placed the glass carefully back on the table. I wanted to scream the truth, that someone had tried to kill me, but the words stuck in my throat. No one would believe me. Not tonight. Madison's mother, Pamela, stormed toward me, her perfectly manicured finger pointing like a dagger. "This is your fault," she hissed, venom in her eyes. "You've never wanted Madison in this family. And now look." Gasps filled the room. Daniel didn't stop her. He didn't defend me. Instead, he stood there, holding Madison's limp hand, glaring at me with a rage I didn't recognize. I bit down on my lip until I tasted blood. Pamela's voice rose above the commotion, sharp and cutting. "You should have stayed home, Eleanor. You've done enough damage in this family." Her words sliced through me, but I forced my face to remain calm. My heart ached, but I swallowed the pain, pressing it deep down where no one could see. I had survived worse. Or so I told myself. Around the table, faces that once carried love now carried suspicion. My niece looked away, avoiding my eyes. My brother-in-law whispered something to his wife, and they both nodded grimly. It felt like a trial, and I was already found guilty. The irony clawed at me. I had switched glasses to save Madison's life, yet now I was the villain. My body trembled, but my voice, when it finally came, was steady. "Someone tried to hurt me," I said softly, my eyes scanning their faces. "That glass wasn't meant for Madison. It was meant for me." Silence fell for a moment, heavy and suffocating. Then Pamela laughed, a bitter sound. "Always the victim," she sneered. "Always making everything about you." Her words drew nervous chuckles from others, sealing my fate in that moment. I sat back, staring at them, realizing just how alone I truly was. Inside, a storm raged. I remembered nights of packing lunches, sewing clothes when money was tight, hiding my exhaustion so Daniel wouldn't see me cry. I remembered birthdays where I was too broke to buy gifts but made cakes from scratch, singing loudly to fill the emptiness. And this was my reward: accusation, betrayal, humiliation in front of strangers. My chest burned with anger and grief, but I refused to let tears fall. They would not see me break. Not here. Not now. Instead, I folded my hands neatly in my lap, my chin lifting just enough to show them I still had pride. But behind my calm mask, I vowed silently, they would regret underestimating me. Daniel's voice broke my thoughts. If anything happens to Madison. He didn't finish the sentence, but his eyes told the story. He believed I had poisoned her. My own son. The boy I had carried for 9 months, the boy I had nursed through sickness, the boy I had shielded from every storm. I saw only hatred in his gaze now. My heart cracked, but I kept my voice even. I didn't do this, I whispered. But even I could hear the hollowness in my tone. He turned away, shutting me out completely. That wound cut deeper than anything else. I stared at his back, my breath ragged, feeling the weight of betrayal pressing on my chest. Somewhere deep inside, though, another feeling stirred. Not just pain, but something harder, sharper. Resolve. The room emptied slowly, people rushing after the ambulance, leaving me in the echoing silence of clinking glasses and half-eaten plates. I stared at the wine glass still sitting there, untouched. My reflection wavered in its surface. Older, tired, forgotten. They thought I was weak, disposable, a problem to be managed. But I wasn't. Not anymore. For years, I had stayed quiet, letting others walk over me, sacrificing without asking for thanks. But tonight had changed something inside me. If someone wanted me gone, then they had underestimated me in the cruelest way. And if my own family was willing to believe the worst of me, then maybe it was time I showed them who I really was. Not Eleanor the widow. Not Eleanor the burden. But Eleanor, the woman they never truly knew. My fingers brushed the note still hidden in my pocket. 4 words. Don't drink that. Whoever slipped me that warning was out there, watching. Someone knew the truth. And that truth could destroy everything, or save me. I replayed the waiter's trembling eyes in my mind. Why me? Why now? My heart pounded with both fear and clarity. If someone had gone this far, it meant secrets were buried deep in my family, secrets they would rather see me dead than exposed. I closed my eyes and took a long, steadying breath. They thought tonight was the end of me. They were wrong. Tonight was only the beginning. What they didn't know was that I had spent my entire life preparing for battles like this. Quietly. Patiently. They saw a fragile widow. But I had resources, connections, knowledge that even my own son knew nothing about. And now, with Madison lying in a hospital bed and suspicion pointed squarely at me, when I finally got home that night, the silence in my house was deafening. My small, tidy kitchen still smelled faintly of the roast chicken I had left in the oven earlier, hoping it would be warm when I returned from Daniel's celebration. Now, I sat alone at the table, staring at the folded note still in my pocket. Don't drink that. For words that could have ended my life, for words that had pulled me into a storm I never imagined. My chest ached from the weight of it all. Madison lying in a hospital bed, Daniel's accusing eyes, Pamela's cruel voice. But as I sat there, memories crept in. Memories of the life I had lived, the sacrifices I had made. They saw me as weak, but they didn't know the years that shaped me, the battles I had already survived. And it was time I remembered them myself. I was only 19 when I married Charles. He was tall, gentle, with a laugh that could warm the coldest night. We didn't have much back then, just a beat-up Chevy and a rented apartment over a laundromat in St. Louis. But we had dreams. Charles wanted to start his own auto shop, and I wanted a family. I took on 3 jobs while he worked at a garage, my hands raw from cleaning houses, my feet blistered from standing shifts as a cashier. But I never complained. When Daniel was born, I remember Charles holding him, tears streaming down his face. "He's our future, Ellie," he whispered. And in that moment, I promised myself I would do whatever it took to give Daniel a better life than the one we had. That promise became the compass for every decision I made after. The years weren't easy. Charles's dream of owning a shop came true, but it came with debt and long nights. I handled the books, kept the shop afloat when bills piled up, negotiated with suppliers when banks turned their backs on us. I never told Charles how close we came to losing everything. I just smiled and told him it would be okay. When his heart gave out suddenly, he was only 48, I became both mother and father to Daniel. I buried my grief in work, pulling double shifts at the hospital cafeteria, managing the shop until I could sell it. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, clutching Charles's old work shirt, but when Daniel looked at me, I smiled. He never knew how much I sacrificed to keep food on the table, to keep him in private school when public schools around us crumbled. I wanted him to have opportunities we never did. I remember one winter when Daniel was 12. He wanted a bicycle for Christmas, a red one he saw at the hardware store. Money was tight. I had barely scraped together enough for rent. But I sold my mother's wedding ring, the only heirloom I had, and bought that bike. His face lit up that morning, his laughter filling the house. "You're the best mom," he shouted, hugging me. I swallowed my tears, knowing what I had given up didn't matter compared to his joy. That was the story of my life, giving, sacrificing, making do with less so Daniel could have more. But children grow, and memories fade. That bike gathered dust in the garage, and Daniel never knew what it had cost me. That's the way it is with mothers. We give quietly, hoping our children will remember, but most of the time, they don't. After Charles's death, I discovered something he had hidden from even me. In his office, buried under stacks of invoices, I found an envelope marked for Ellie. Inside was a deed to a small plot of land outside town, land he had purchased years earlier, knowing its value would grow. He wrote in his neat handwriting, "For you for the future. Stay humble, but don't ever let anyone think you're less than you are." I clutched that paper like it was gold, and in time, it became just that. Developers came knocking when the highway expanded, offering more money than I ever dreamed. I sold it quietly, investing in bonds and stocks with the help of an old friend from the bank. Over the years, my nest egg grew. I never flaunted it. Not even Daniel knew the truth. Let them think I was just a widow scraping by. I preferred it that way. I had learned early that money makes people greedy, and greed destroys families. As Daniel grew older, I supported every dream he had. When he wanted to study engineering, I took out loans in my name. When he fell in love with Madison, I welcomed her, even though I sensed she didn't truly respect me. Madison was polished, ambitious, always scrolling her phone at family dinners. She once joked that I should try Botox, just for fun. I laughed it off, but inside, I felt the sting. Still, I never said a word. I thought loving them enough would make them love me back. But I was wrong. Over time, I noticed Daniel calling less, visiting only when he needed money. Madison treated me like a burden, a relic from the past. And yet, I kept giving, birthday checks, contributions to their down payment, even covering hospital bills when Madison's mother had surgery. No one thanked me. They acted as if it was owed to them. I told myself it didn't matter. But deep down it did. What they never knew was how many times I went without so they could have more. There were winters I kept the heat low to save on bills, nights I ate canned soup so I could send Daniel gas money. My body still carried the aches of years of cleaning other people's floors, lifting boxes too heavy for my back, walking home in the rain because the bus fare needed to be saved. I wore the same coat for 15 years, sewing patches on the elbows, while Madison paraded around in designer dresses. I endured the whispers at church, "Poor Eleanor, she just can't seem to catch a break." And I held my head high because I knew the truth. I wasn't poor. I wasn't broken. I was building something quietly, carefully. Something they could never take from me. Charles's words haunted me often, "Stay humble, Ellie. But don't ever let anyone think you're less than you are." Humble I had been, maybe too humble. I had spent decades letting people underestimate me, letting them believe I was weak. That night at the restaurant, when they looked at me with suspicion and contempt, I realized I had become invisible in my own family. They saw an aging woman, gray at the temples, hands spotted with time. They didn't see the woman who once negotiated with men twice her size, who once saved a business from collapse, who once walked into banks and demanded respect. They didn't see the quiet wealth I had built, the power I had tucked away. And maybe that was my mistake. I had hidden myself for too long. The more I thought about Madison lying in that hospital bed, the more I realized this wasn't just an accident. Someone had targeted me, and whether my family wanted to believe it or not, the truth mattered. I had given them everything, and now one of them, or someone close to them, wanted me gone. But they didn't know the full story. They didn't know about the investments, the properties, the accounts I had set up in case of emergencies. They didn't know I had contacts who still owed me favors. Old friends, business associates, people who respected what I had done quietly in the background. For years, I had kept that side of me hidden, thinking I would never need it. But maybe Charles had known. Maybe that's why he left me that land, why he wrote those words. Because he knew a day like this might come. As the night stretched on, I sat in my kitchen, sipping cold coffee, replaying everything in my mind. Every sacrifice, every dismissal, every slight. I thought about the family I had built my life around, the same family that now turned on me without hesitation. And something inside me hardened. I wasn't just Eleanor, the widow, the mother, the woman to be pitied. I was stronger than they remembered. Stronger than they knew. And if someone wanted me gone, then they were about to learn a painful truth. I don't break easily. I never have. I never will. She had no idea that her years of sacrifice were about to be tested in ways she never imagined. The next morning, I drove to the hospital with a knot in my chest. The air smelled of antiseptic and coffee as I walked through the automatic doors, clutching my purse close. Nurses bustled past, their shoes squeaking against the linoleum. When I reached Madison's room, Daniel was already there, sitting at her bedside, his face pale from exhaustion. Madison lay still, her eyes closed, machines beeping steadily beside her. For a moment, my heart softened. This was my family, my son, the boy I raised with every ounce of strength I had. I opened my mouth to speak, but Daniel cut me off without looking at me. "You shouldn't be here, Mom," he said coldly. His words froze me in place. I felt like a stranger in my own son's life, unwanted, accused. My throat tightened. Daniel, I didn't. But he turned, his eyes hard. "Just go. Haven't you done enough?" The cruelty in his tone sliced deeper than any knife. It wasn't the first time Daniel had spoken to me that way. Over the years, his respect had chipped away, little by little. I remembered when he and Madison bought their first home. I had given them $10,000 to help with the down payment, scraping it from my savings. Weeks later, at a housewarming party, Madison laughed in front of her friends and said, "Daniel and I did it all on our own. We worked hard for this place." I stood in the corner, holding a glass of lemonade, my face burning. Daniel never corrected her. He let them all believe I hadn't lifted a finger. That was the first time I realized my sacrifices had become invisible to him, as if they had never happened at all. The pattern continued in small humiliations. Holidays where I cooked for hours, only for Madison to wrinkle her nose and order takeout instead. Birthdays where my gifts were brushed aside, unopened, while hers shined in glossy bags. I remember one Thanksgiving when I brought my famous pumpkin pie, the recipe my mother handed down. Madison smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, that's rustic. We'll put it on the kids' table." The laughter that followed still echoes in my ears. My pie sat untouched that night, while Madison's catered cheesecake got all the praise. I told myself it didn't matter, but each slight carved another scar on my heart. Even outside family gatherings, the disrespect followed me. Daniel once asked me to babysit their little girl, Sophie, while they attended a wedding. I happily agreed, baking cookies, reading bedtime stories, tucking her in with love. When they returned, Madison barely looked at me. Instead, she examined the kitchen counters and frowned. "We prefer organic milk for Sophie," she said, her voice sharp, as if I had poisoned her child. Daniel put his arm around her and said nothing. No thank you. No appreciation. Just criticism, as if my love wasn't good enough. I drove home that night in tears, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. What hurt most was how easily Daniel allowed Madison's influence to shape him. My once sweet, thoughtful son now echoed her dismissive tone. He stopped calling me for advice, stopped visiting except when he needed something. When his car broke down, I paid for repairs. When their roof leaked, I covered the contractor's bill. Yet each time, Madison whispered in his ear, convincing him that my help was a burden, not a blessing. Slowly, I felt him slipping away, as though I was no longer his mother but an inconvenient reminder of where he came from. Madison had built a wall around him, and I was left standing outside in the cold. The betrayal deepened when I overheard them one evening. I had dropped by unannounced with a basket of muffins for Sophie. From the porch, before I knocked, I heard Madison's voice through the cracked window. "Your mom is suffocating us, Daniel. Always hanging around, acting like she's still in charge. She's holding us back." Daniel's reply was muffled, but his words still pierced me. "I know. I'm tired of it too." I stood frozen, muffins in hand, tears streaming down my face. I left quietly, placing the basket on the porch, never knocking. That night, I sat in my car in the driveway, wondering how the boy I raised could so easily dismiss me. The pain of that memory never left me. Yet despite their cruelty, I kept giving. When Sophie needed braces, I wrote the check. When Madison lost her job for a few months, I covered their mortgage to keep them afloat. I told myself it was for Daniel, for Sophie, for the family I loved more than myself. But deep down, I knew they were using me. And still, I couldn't stop. Maybe it was habit, maybe it was hope, that one day they would see my sacrifices and finally understand. But instead, they grew bolder, crueler. My silence had taught them that my love was endless, my patience unbreakable. They believed I would endure anything. They believed wrong. Not everyone was blind to the truth. My neighbor, Gloria, an old friend from church, often reminded me, "Eleanor, you give too much. They don't deserve you." She saw the way I bent over backwards, the way I came home exhausted but still baked cookies for Sophie. "One day, they'll regret treating you this way," she said, squeezing my hand. My brother, Henry, tried to intervene once, telling Daniel he should show me more respect. Daniel shrugged it off. "Mom's fine. She doesn't need much." That was the story he told himself, that I was unbreakable, unfeeling, always there. They didn't see the nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if all my sacrifices had been in vain. The isolation grew heavier with time. Madison stopped inviting me to family trips. Daniel started making excuses when I asked to see Sophie. "She's busy with school," he'd say. "We'll plan something soon." But weeks turned into months. I found myself sitting alone at my kitchen table more often than not, staring at photos of a family that barely acknowledged me. The world I had built my entire life around was slipping through my fingers, and I felt powerless to stop it. But as the disrespect piled higher, so did something else inside me, a quiet, simmering anger that I had buried for too long. The poisoning at the birthday dinner wasn't just a shocking event. It was the breaking point. I had endured years of being treated like an afterthought, of watching my sacrifices dismissed, my presence unwanted. But now, someone had gone too far. They hadn't just disrespected me, they had tried to erase me. And as I sat in that hospital room, Daniel glaring at me like a stranger, I realized I couldn't stay silent any longer. I couldn't keep letting them believe I was powerless. My love had been taken for granted, my patience mistaken for weakness. But the truth was, I was stronger than they ever gave me credit for. I stood there quietly, watching Madison breathe, listening to the steady beeping of the machines. Daniel refused to look at me, his hand gripping hers tightly. Pamela glared at me from the corner, her face full of blame. They all thought they knew who I was, the helpless widow, the aging mother, the burden. But they were wrong. My heart still ached, but beneath that ache was a fire, a determination I hadn't felt in years. They wanted me to disappear, but I wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. Not until I uncovered the truth. Not until I reminded them who I really was. But Eleanor was done being everyone's doormat. It was time to remind them who they were dealing with. The night after visiting Madison in the hospital, I sat in my living room, the television flickering quietly in the background. I wasn't watching, my mind was elsewhere. The note burned in my pocket like a brand, "Don't drink that." Someone had tried to kill me, and everyone believed I was the one to blame. That betrayal hurt worse than the attempt on my life. But grief and anger had sharpened into something else, clarity. If no one believed me, then I would find out the truth myself. I had kept my strength and resources hidden for decades, but now, it was time to use them. I wasn't going to sit back and let them destroy me. No, I was going to find out who wanted me dead. The first step was calling in an old favor. Years ago, when Charles ran the shop, we had a customer named Robert Hale, a police detective who couldn't afford full repairs on his cruiser. Charles did the work anyway, refusing payment. Robert never forgot that. Over the years, I kept in touch. Christmas cards, occasional phone calls. I dialed his number that night, my hands trembling. "Eleanor," he said warmly, "it's been too long." I cut straight to the point, telling him about the note, the switch, Madison's collapse. He went silent for a moment, then sighed. "If what you're saying is true, this is bigger than it looks. But tread carefully. Family's the trickiest kind of enemy." His words confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't random. It was close. Too close. I began watching more closely, piecing together details my family had overlooked. At the hospital, I noticed Madison's sister, Kelsey, whispering frantically to Pamela in the hallway. Their faces were pale, worried, not for Madison, but for something else. Pamela clutched her phone like a lifeline, her voice sharp as she said, "If this gets out, we're finished." My ears perked up, though I kept walking as if I hadn't heard. Finished? What could they be hiding? Later that night, I walked past Daniel while he spoke on the phone. "I told you we'd figure it out," he muttered. "She won't find out. Just relax." My stomach twisted. He wasn't talking about Madison's health. He was talking about me. My own son. The boy I raised was hiding something from me, something dangerous. At home, I pulled out a dusty shoebox from the top of my closet. Inside were documents, bank statements, old deeds, everything I had carefully organized over the years. Among them was a leather-bound notebook where I tracked investments and kept notes on people I trusted. I flipped through its pages, my pen steady in my hand, listing names: Pamela, resentful; Madison, ambitious; Daniel, easily influenced. Who stood to gain if I were gone? The answer chilled me. If I died, everything I had built, my savings, my properties, my life insurance, would go directly to Daniel. And by extension, Madison. They wouldn't just gain money. They would gain independence from me entirely. The motive was clear, and it shattered me. The very people I sacrificed for might have been the ones planning my end. But speculation wasn't enough. I needed proof. So I turned to someone else from my past. Gloria's son, Marcus, a tech whiz who had built his own security business. He owed me. Years ago, when his mother fell ill, I paid her hospital bills in secret. I invited him over, pouring him coffee at my kitchen table. "I need your help," I said simply. His eyebrows shot up as I explained, but he didn't hesitate. "I can look into their accounts, their messages, see if anything's off," he said. Within days, Marcus uncovered what I suspected. Daniel and Madison were drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out, loans unpaid, foreclosure notices looming. They had hidden it well, but Marcus found everything. "They're desperate," he said grimly. "And desperate people do reckless things." Armed with this knowledge, I watched them more closely. At the hospital, I noticed how Daniel avoided my eyes, how Madison, even in her weakened state, whispered to him when she thought I wasn't listening. Pamela, too, hovered constantly, her tone always sharp when she spoke to me. They were united in their hostility. But cracks were showing. One afternoon, I overheard Pamela snapping at Daniel. "You said this would fix everything. Now look where we are." Fix everything. Those words echoed in my mind. Fix what? Their debts? Their reputations? Or their problems with me? I smiled to myself, though my heart ached. They thought I was still the blind, giving mother. But I was listening now. Watching. And I wasn't going to let them bury me so easily. I began piecing together their vulnerabilities, just as I once did when running the shop's books. Pamela had a history of gambling debts. Marcus found withdrawals at casinos, late-night transfers. Madison had secretly applied for personal loans in Daniel's name. Daniel himself had defaulted on a car loan, something he'd never admit out loud. Together, they were a house of cards, one gust away from collapse. And I realized something powerful. They needed me more than they hated me. My wealth, my resources, my name, they couldn't survive without them. That knowledge gave me strength. They saw me as weak, but in truth, I was the pillar holding them up. And now, I had the chance to turn that pillar into a weapon. I confided in Gloria, sitting on her porch one evening as the sun dipped low. She listened quietly, then patted my hand. "Eleanor, you've carried them for too long. Maybe it's time they learn to stand on their own." I nodded slowly. "It's more than that now. Someone tried to kill me. And I won't rest until I know who." Gloria's eyes hardened. "Then don't just defend yourself. Take back your power." Her words struck deep. For years, I had played the victim, the giver, the silent one. But now, I had the chance to become something else entirely. Not just a survivor, but a strategist. And I would use every resource at my disposal. The next step was subtle. I began leaving hints, small comments at the hospital to test their reactions. "Funny," I said to Pamela one morning, sipping coffee, "how quickly debts can catch up when least expected." She stiffened, her face draining of color. "What debts?" she snapped too quickly. I only smiled, letting silence do the work. With Daniel, I asked softly, "Do you ever think about responsibility? About what happens when secrets come to light?" His jaw tightened, his eyes darting away. These tiny cracks told me everything. They were hiding something, and they were terrified it might surface. Good. Let them squirm. It was the first time in years I felt a sense of control. Marcus delivered another blow days later. "Your name came up in a life insurance query," he told me, his voice low. "Daniel requested information about payouts." My stomach dropped, though my face remained calm. The betrayal stung sharper than ever, but it also confirmed what I already knew: my death was worth more to them than my life. I thanked Marcus, closing my eyes as anger surged. For decades, I had sacrificed everything for Daniel, and now he had reduced me to a dollar sign, a policy to cash in. The pain was unbearable, but it also fueled me. If they wanted a game of survival, then I would play. But I would play to win. As the days passed, I collected evidence quietly: financial records, overheard conversations, Marcus's findings. Piece by piece, I built a picture of desperation, deceit, and betrayal. Yet through it all, I remained calm, my mask firmly in place. At the hospital, I smiled politely, brought flowers, played the dutiful mother-in-law. But inside, I was sharpening my weapons, preparing for the moment I would reveal the truth. They thought I was still powerless. They thought I was cornered. But they didn't realize I had spent a lifetime learning how to survive when the odds were stacked against me. And one evening, as I stood by Madison's bed, listening to her shallow breaths, I whispered to myself, "You tried to break me. But you've only made me stronger." My reflection in the hospital window was steady, unflinching. They had no idea who they were truly dealing with. Not Eleanor the widow. Not Eleanor the victim. But Eleanor, the woman who would tear their lies apart and make them face the consequences of their cruelty. Armed with this information, Eleanor was ready to teach everyone a lesson they'd never forget. The night Gloria told me to take back my power, I barely slept. My body ached with exhaustion, but my mind buzzed with plans. Every move had to be precise. One mistake, and they would turn it all back on me. But I had spent my life running a household, a shop, and a family full of egos. Quiet strategy was second nature to me. This time, however, the stakes were life and death. I began small, with silence. Silence is sharper than shouting, more dangerous than accusations. They had grown used to me filling the gaps, smoothing the edges, patching every hole in their lives. But now, I withdrew that energy. When Pamela tried to criticize my cooking, I only smiled faintly and said nothing. When Daniel asked for help with a bill, I shrugged, pretending not to understand. Madison, frail in her hospital bed, expected sympathy and doting. I brought flowers, but never lingered, leaving before she could manipulate me with her tears. The more distance I created, the more restless they became. Like addicts deprived of their drug, they twitched and snapped, unable to mask their fear. That fear told me I was on the right path. The trap needed bait. And in my world, bait meant money. I started whispering casually that I was considering rewriting my will. I let the words slip in conversations with nurses, with Gloria, even in the hospital cafeteria where Pamela was always lurking. "It's funny," I said loudly one day, stirring sugar into my tea, "how money changes hands when people least expect it. Maybe it's time I reconsider who deserves what." I could feel Pamela's eyes burning into my back. Later that night, Daniel called me, his voice tight. "Mom, what's this I hear about you changing your will?" I feigned surprise. "Oh, word travels fast." He pushed, his tone sharp. "It's reckless to make big decisions when emotions are high." I laughed softly. "Emotions don't cloud my judgment, Daniel. If anything, they clear it." He hung up abruptly. Good. Let him stew. Meanwhile, Marcus fed me more information. "They're scrambling," he said one evening, tapping his laptop. "Pamela tried to transfer $5,000 from Daniel's account, but it bounced. Madison's credit score is tanking. And Daniel, he called the insurance company again. He's desperate." My jaw clenched. Desperate people make mistakes. That would be their undoing. But I needed more than financial dirt. I needed to see their hands in the poison. Proof that no one could deny. So I enlisted Detective Hale's quiet help. He couldn't open an official investigation without evidence, but he could give me tools. He handed me a small recording device, thin enough to hide in a pocket. "Keep it running when you're with them," he said. "Sometimes people say more than they should when they think no one's listening." I pressed it to my chest, gratitude filling my throat. This was my weapon now. Not a gun, not a knife, but their own words. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One late evening, while visiting Madison, I pretended to doze in the chair beside her bed. Pamela came in, thinking I was asleep. Her voice was sharp, her whisper hurried. "We need to speed this up. She's tougher than I thought." My heart hammered as Madison replied, her tone icy, "Don't rush me. If she changes the will before..." She stopped abruptly when Daniel entered the room. "Quiet," he hissed. "Walls have ears." I kept my breathing slow, steady, praying the recorder picked up every word. When they left, I excused myself calmly, walked outside, and only then let the shiver run through me. They weren't just suspects anymore. They were conspirators. The next phase of my trap was to push them further, to tempt their greed until they slipped. I hosted a dinner at my house, the first since Madison's poisoning. "Family dinner," I said sweetly over the phone. "Just like old times." They couldn't refuse. That night, I cooked carefully, plating everything myself, never letting them near the drinks or dishes. Pamela's eyes followed me everywhere, frustrated that she couldn't interfere. We ate in strained silence until I set down my fork. "I've been thinking," I began softly, "about the future. About who really deserves my legacy." Daniel shifted in his chair, Pamela's lips tightened, Madison's pale face hardened. I smiled. It may not be who everyone expects. The tension was thick, suffocating. "But," I continued lightly, "I want to be sure. Actions speak louder than words, after all." I excused myself to fetch dessert, leaving them in the dining room with the recorder tucked neatly under a cushion. When I returned, their voices were hushed, urgent. They stopped immediately, too late. The device had captured enough. Later, Marcus and I listened together. Pamela's hiss was clear. "If she changes it, we get nothing. We need to act before she finalizes it." Daniel's reply was weaker but damning. "I know, but what if she already suspects?" Madison's voice, thin but venomous, cut through. "Then we make her believe she's safe until it's done." My stomach turned, bile rising in my throat. My own son, plotting my death with his wife and her daughter. But there it was. Proof. Solid, undeniable. My trap had worked. Still, I didn't confront them. Not yet. Exposing them too early would let them twist the story. I needed the timing to be perfect, the stage set so that their guilt would destroy them in front of everyone who mattered. My plan was simple: reveal their scheme at Madison's hospital discharge celebration, when extended family and friends would gather. They would have nowhere to hide, no way to spin the truth. Their own words would condemn them. In the meantime, I twisted the knife slowly. I grew kinder, softer, as if nothing had changed. I visited Madison with small gifts, helped Daniel with errands, even shared recipes with Pamela. The more warmth I showed, the more guilty they looked. Pamela snapped at little things. Madison avoided eye contact. Daniel grew quieter. They were waiting for me to fall, but instead, I rose stronger. It was delicious, watching them squirm. The final touch was rewriting my will for real, but not in their favor. With Robert Hale's guidance, I documented everything, leaving the bulk of my estate to a trust managed by Gloria and Marcus. Daniel would inherit nothing outright. I left him only one thing, a letter sealed to be read after my death. The lawyer raised an eyebrow, but I only smiled. "He'll understand," I said. In truth, he would understand too late. As the discharge celebration approached, I rehearsed my unveiling. Marcus would prepare the recording for playback, Hale would attend quietly in plain clothes, and Gloria would stand at my side. I imagined their faces as their own voices filled the room, exposing every poisonous word. I imagined the shame, the fury, the collapse of their carefully constructed facade. That would be my justice, not a courtroom, but a reckoning in the very circle they sought to deceive. The night before the celebration, I stood before my mirror, studying the lines of my face. For years, I had seen only weariness, the toll of sacrifice. But now, I saw steel. I saw the survivor Charles once loved, the strategist who built a life from nothing. They had underestimated me, and soon, the world would see why that was their gravest mistake. I touched the recorder in my pocket one last time, whispering to my reflection, "Tomorrow, the game ends." And with that, I turned off the light, ready to spring the trap. The day of Madison's discharge celebration arrived like a storm I had been bracing for all my life. The house buzzed with chatter, relatives spilling into the living room with smiles and casseroles. The smell of baked chicken and apple pie filled the air, masking the stench of betrayal that hung between the walls. I moved gracefully among them, my blue dress crisp, my hair set the way Charles always loved. To them, I was the doting matriarch. Inside, I was a lioness, waiting to bare her teeth. Pamela swept in first, her lipstick sharp as her tongue. "You've gone all out, Eleanor," she said, scanning the room as if she owned it. Behind her, Daniel carried Madison's bag, his shoulders tight. Madison, still pale but smiling faintly, walked in on Daniel's arm, milking the sympathy of every guest who rushed to hug her. I kissed her cheek lightly, my stomach twisting at the thought that she had been meant to drink the poison instead of me. None of them knew I held their future in my purse, tucked between tissues and mints, a small recorder, loaded with their whispers of murder. The evening rolled on with forced laughter. Family friends clinked glasses, cousins teased one another, and I smiled through it all, though every nerve in me strained toward the moment. Pamela made a little speech, of course, dripping with false warmth. "We are so blessed to have Madison safe and sound," she declared, her hand clutching Daniel's as if staking a claim. Daniel nodded solemnly, the good son, the good husband. Madison beamed weakly, her eyes scanning the crowd for validation. They had no idea the ground beneath them was about to crack wide open. After dessert, I cleared my throat. The room quieted. "Before we finish," I began, my voice soft but steady, "I'd like to share something important." Eyes turned toward me. Some smiled, expecting a sentimental toast. Pamela frowned, sensing danger. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Madison folded her hands in her lap, her smile fading. I reached into my purse, pulling out the recorder. "For weeks, I've carried a burden. A secret. Tonight it ends." A ripple moved through the room. "What are you talking about, Mom?" Daniel asked quickly, his tone edged with panic. I ignored him, pressing the button. Static filled the silence, then their voices spilled out, sharp and unmistakable. Pamela's hiss, "If she changes it, we get nothing. We need to act before she finalizes it." Daniel's reply, shaky but clear, "I know, but what if she already suspects?" Madison's venomous tone, "Then we make her believe she's safe until it's done." Gasps erupted across the room. Plates clattered, chairs scraped against the floor. Pamela's face drained of color, Daniel's mouth fell open, and Madison clutched the arms of her chair, trembling. For a moment, the whole world froze, their own words condemning them louder than I ever could. "How could you?" Gloria's voice cut through the silence, her hand pressed to her chest. Others murmured in disbelief, shaking their heads. Pamela stammered, This is taken out of context," but the room erupted in protest. "Context?" One cousin spat. "You plotted to kill her." Daniel stood suddenly, his face red. "It's not true. She's twisting this." "You don't understand," his voice cracked, the mask slipping. Madison sobbed, burying her face in her hands. Pamela lunged for the recorder, but Marcus, standing firm at my side, stepped between us. "Don't," he warned. I rose slowly, my hands steady. 4 years, I gave everything to this family. I paid your debts, your bills, your mortgages. I sacrificed my life so you could live yours in comfort. And this is how you repay me, by trying to poison me. My voice trembled, not with fear, but with fury. Tears welled in my eyes, but I did not let them fall. You saw me as weak, disposable. But you forgot, I built this family. And I will not let you tear it apart. The room fell into chaos. Relatives argued, some shouting at Daniel, others turning on Pamela. "You should be ashamed," one aunt cried. "She raised you better than this." Madison's cousin stormed out, disgusted. Detective Hale, blending into the crowd all evening, stepped forward at last, badge flashing. "We'll take it from here," he said firmly. The room gasped again. Daniel's knees buckled, Pamela grabbed his arm for balance, and Madison wailed as if the walls were caving in. As Hale read them their rights, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time in decades, I wasn't the servant, the giver, the invisible backbone. I was seen, respected, feared. Pamela spat curses as they led her out, Daniel's eyes begged me for mercy, Madison sobbed uncontrollably. But I did not move. I watched them leave as if watching strangers. My family, my blood, but no longer my burden. When the door shut behind them, silence stretched. Dozens of eyes turned back to me. Shame, pity, admiration. It was all there. Gloria stepped forward, took my hand and whispered, "You did it, Eleanor. You took back your power." My lips curved into a small, weary smile. "No," I whispered, "I reminded them who I am." But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. They had plotted for years, whispered behind my back, chipped away at my dignity. One night of truth would not erase decades of disrespect. There were still debts to settle, lessons to teach, and boundaries to draw. I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. As the guests slowly dispersed, murmuring in shock, I stood alone in the quiet house. The walls seemed to breathe with relief, as though they, too, had been waiting for this confrontation. I touched the recorder one last time, then slipped it into the drawer. My battle had only just begun. Because while Pamela, Daniel, and Madison thought they had silenced me forever, tonight proved one thing: Eleanor Whitmore was no one's victim. And tomorrow, I would decide what came next. The morning after the confrontation, my house was quiet. Too quiet. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, staring at the steam as if it could tell me what came next. The night before had cracked everything wide open, but now the pieces needed to fall. The world knew who Pamela, Daniel, and Madison truly were. But exposure was just the beginning. Consequences, that was the true reckoning. Word spread faster than I imagined. By noon, cousins were calling, neighbors dropping by with nervous glances, church friends sending messages. "Eleanor, we had no idea," they said, their voices heavy with shock and guilt. Some cried. Some avoided me altogether. The community that once only saw me as the quiet mother now saw me as the survivor of her own family's betrayal. But for every sympathetic voice, there was another whispering blame. What kind of mother raises a son who would do such a thing? The sting of that cut deep, but I swallowed it. People always needed someone to blame. Daniel called me from jail that night. His voice was hoarse, desperate. "Mom, you have to believe me. I didn't want to hurt you. It was Pamela. She pushed me." His words cracked under the weight of shame. My heart twisted, torn between fury and pity. You're a grown man, Daniel, I said evenly. No one forced your mouth to speak those words. No one made you turn your back on me. Silence stretched on the line before he whispered, I don't know who I am without her. My chest tightened. He was still a boy in many ways, weak and searching for direction. But I couldn't give him mine anymore. Then maybe it's time you find out, I replied, and hung up. The next day, I met with Gloria and Marcus at the lawyer's office. We reviewed my will one more time. Are you sure about this? The lawyer asked. Once it's done, there's no turning back. I looked him square in the eye. I am sure. They chose their path. Now I'm choosing mine. The papers were signed, my estate safely secured in the trust. Daniel and Pamela would get nothing. Madison, too, was cut out completely. Their betrayal had cost them dearly. At church the following Sunday, I felt eyes on me from every pew. Some warm with respect, others sharp with judgment. After the service, Pastor Raymond took my hands. Eleanor, you've carried a heavy cross, he said gently. But remember, justice without mercy can harden the soul. His words pierced me. Could I forgive them? Could I open the door, even a crack, to redemption? My heart said no. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I nodded politely. People needed to believe in forgiveness, even if I wasn't ready to grant it. Back at home, relatives gathered in waves. My niece Clara was the first to speak plainly. Aunt Eleanor, you've been carrying everyone for too long. It's time we carried you. Her words made my throat tighten. For so long, I'd believed I had no allies. But now, faces I thought indifferent stood by me, vowing to help. Cousins offered rides, nieces cooked meals, even distant friends volunteered support. It was humbling, and it reminded me that family wasn't always blood. Sometimes it was choice. But not everyone stood with me. Madison's father, Pamela's ex-husband, stormed into my yard one evening, his face red with fury. You ruined my daughter's life, he shouted. She's sick, Eleanor. She didn't know what she was saying. His rage shook me, but Marcus stepped forward, calm and steady. She plotted with them, Marcus said firmly. We all heard it. The man sneered, spit at the ground, and left without another word. The line between truth and denial ran deep, and some people would never cross it. Meanwhile, Pamela's reputation collapsed. Her employer put her on leave, neighbors avoided her, and friends whispered behind her back. Daniel lost his job, his accounts frozen under investigation. Madison's college rescinded her scholarship, citing ethical concerns. The empire they'd built on lies and manipulation crumbled overnight. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Life itself was teaching them the lessons they had ignored from me. Still, I wasn't blind to my own pain. At night, when the house was still, I let the tears come. I mourned the son I had raised, the boy who once held my hand at parades, the young man who called me his best friend after his father died. I mourned the daughter-in-law I had welcomed, hoping she would love him with the devotion I'd once had for Charles. I mourned the granddaughter-in-law who might have been family, had greed not poisoned her heart. They were alive, but I grieved as if they were gone. Because in truth, they were. Then came the reckoning within myself. For decades, I let disrespect slide, believing patience was love, believing sacrifice was duty. But sacrifice without respect is slavery. I had been their servant, not their matriarch. That realization burned, but it also set me free. For the first time, I saw the value of my own life not in what I gave, but in who I was. Eleanor Whitmore, mother, widow, survivor, strategist. More than enough. When the court hearings began, the family divided. Some testified against Pamela and Madison, horrified by the recording. Others begged the judge for leniency. Daniel, torn between loyalty and guilt, pled guilty to conspiracy. His voice cracked in the courtroom when he said, I betrayed my mother. My heart shattered, but I held my head high. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about truth being spoken aloud. When the gavel fell and sentences were handed down, I felt both relief and sorrow. Pamela received years in prison. Madison, though younger, faced time too. Daniel, my son, was given a reduced sentence for cooperation. He looked back at me once before being led away, his eyes drowning in regret. I wanted to reach for him, to hold him, but I stayed rooted. Sometimes love meant letting go. Back home, the reckoning continued. Those who once dismissed me now sought my advice. Relatives who whispered behind my back now apologized, offering hands of help. It wasn't power I craved, but respect, and finally, I had it. I had taught them not with anger, but with truth. Not by demanding, but by standing. Yet, forgiveness still lingered, unresolved. At night, I whispered Charles's name, asking what he would do. His memory warmed me, reminded me that strength and mercy could live together. But mercy, I decided, must be earned. And for Pamela, Daniel, and Madison, that road had only just begun. As the dust settled, I realized something profound. This reckoning wasn't just theirs. It was mine. A lifetime of silence had ended. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer just a mother, a widow, a giver. I was Eleanor Whitmore, and they would never forget it. Spring came slowly that year, as if the earth itself needed time to heal after the storm. The trial was behind me, the house was quiet, and the air smelled of lilacs drifting in from the yard. I sat on the porch one morning with a cup of tea, watching robins build a nest in the oak tree Charles had planted decades ago. For the first time in years, my heart felt light, not unscarred but free. This was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of something new. Neighbors began stopping by more often, not out of pity, but respect. "You're stronger than any of us realized," Mrs. Kelly said as she dropped off a pie. Her words warmed me. For so long, I had been the quiet helper in the background, but now, people looked at me differently. They saw my strength, my resilience, my dignity. And slowly, I began to see it too. Family gatherings shifted. Clara and her children visited weekly, filling the house with laughter I hadn't heard in years. Cousins who once avoided me called to check in, asking for advice about jobs, marriages, even recipes. I became the matriarch not because I demanded it, but because they finally understood I had been holding us all together all along. It was bittersweet, realizing that respect only came after betrayal, but I chose to embrace it. Better late than never. One Sunday, Gloria and I took a walk through the park. "You've changed," she said gently, linking her arm with mine. "You used to apologize for everything. Now, you move like a queen." I laughed softly, shaking my head. A queen without a crown. Gloria stopped, looking me square in the eye. "No, Eleanor. A queen with something better, wisdom." Her words sank into me, deep and true. For the first time, I believed them. But new beginnings are never clean slates. Letters arrived from Daniel, written in shaky handwriting. "Mom, I think of you every day," he wrote. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope one day you can look at me without hate." My eyes blurred as I read them. I didn't hate him. I hated what he had done, what he had allowed himself to become. He was still my son, and that bond could never be erased. But forgiveness is not a gift, it is a journey. I wrote back, cautiously. "Daniel, healing takes time. Prove to me you've changed, and maybe one day we can start again." Pamela wrote too, her tone cold, almost defensive. "You've destroyed my life," she scrawled. "I'll never forgive you." I folded the letter and tucked it away without reply. Forgiveness may be a choice, but so is distance. Pamela had chosen her path long before the poison touched my lips. I owed her nothing. Madison's letter surprised me most. It was filled with regret. "I was young, foolish, and blinded by greed," she confessed. "Prison has opened my eyes. If you can find it in your heart, I'd like a chance to prove I'm not the monster I became." I stared at her words for hours. She was barely more than a girl, and while she had tried to end me, perhaps prison had given her what I never could, perspective. I decided to leave the door open, just a crack. People can change, especially when life forces them to. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to check on me, his loyalty unwavering. He fixed the squeaky porch step, mowed the lawn, even installed new locks on the doors. "Can't have anyone sneaking in, Miss Eleanor," he said with a grin. But behind the humor, I saw the quiet respect in his eyes. To him, I wasn't just an old woman. I was a warrior. His faith reminded me that strength isn't always loud, sometimes it's steady and unshakable. As weeks turned into months, I built new routines. I joined a book club at the library, where women my age debated stories of betrayal and triumph, laughing over tea and cookies. I volunteered at the community center, tutoring children who reminded me of Daniel when he was little, bright, hopeful, unspoiled by greed. Giving them my time filled a hole I hadn't realized was still there. It reminded me that my legacy wasn't money or property, it was impact. The trust once set up for my estate became a tool for good. With Gloria and Marcus managing it, funds went to scholarships, food pantries, and medical support for families in need. When I saw the first thank you letters pinned to my fridge, tears slid down my cheeks. Pamela, Daniel, and Madison had wanted to steal my wealth. Instead, it was building futures they would never touch. That, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all. Yet even as joy returned, boundaries remained firm. When distant relatives hinted at moving in or borrowing money, I smiled politely and said no. I've learned my lesson, I told Clara one afternoon. Love doesn't mean giving until you're empty. Love means knowing when to stop. She nodded, squeezing my hand. I wished I had understood that years ago, but wisdom often arrives through pain. One evening, as the sun set golden over the yard, I pulled out Charles's old photo album. His smile beamed at me from the pages, steady and kind. I whispered to him, "You were right, Charles. Humility has its place. But so does strength." For years, I thought I honored him by staying quiet, by sacrificing. Now, I realized I honored him by surviving, by standing tall. I imagined him nodding in approval, his hand warm in mine. The community began inviting me to speak. At church, at women's groups, even at the high school. They wanted to hear my story. I kept it simple, speaking from the heart. Sometimes the people we love most betray us. Sometimes we give too much and forget ourselves. But strength doesn't come from money or power. It comes from remembering who you are, even when others forget. The applause never mattered. What mattered were the women who hugged me after, tears in their eyes, whispering, "You gave me courage." By autumn, the house no longer felt like a place of grief. It felt alive again. The laughter of nieces and nephews, the smell of apple pies cooling on the counter, the sound of music drifting from Gloria's visits. It was a home, not a battleground. The ghosts of betrayal still lingered, but they no longer haunted me. They had become lessons etched into the walls, reminders that I would never again be silenced. As Thanksgiving approached, Clara suggested hosting it at my house. "You're the heart of this family," she said. I hesitated at first, but when the day arrived, the rooms overflowed with love. Children chased each other through the halls, cousins shared stories over turkey and pie, and Gloria led a prayer that made us all bow our heads. I looked around the table, tears stinging my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt whole. Not because everyone was there, but because the right people were. That night, after the dishes were washed and the house was quiet, I sat by the fire, pen in hand. I wrote one final letter to myself, a promise sealed in ink. "Eleanor, you are no longer invisible. You are no one's victim. You are the matriarch, the warrior, the woman who rose when they tried to bury her. You are enough." I folded it gently, slid it into the family Bible, and closed the cover. As the flames crackled, I whispered into the silence, "Sometimes the people we think are weakest turn out to be the strongest of all." And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I had proven it. My new beginning had arrived, not as a gift, but as a victory. And I would live every day from then on as the woman I was always meant to be. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.